I gave my brother a kidney on a Tuesday. On Friday, I found the first hairline crack in the story he'd told me, the one I'd risked my life for. But I'll get to that. Marco is my little brother, 2 years younger, taller by half a head, and born with the kind of smile that makes people overlook everything else, the unpaid loans, the missed birthdays, the almost apologies. Growing up, he was the one who could talk Mom into letting us skip chores if we promised to bond as siblings, which usually meant him convincing me to make him grilled cheese while he played video games. I used to say we were close in the way some siblings are, where you can go 3 weeks without speaking, then drop back into conversation like no time passed. We didn't tell each other everything, but there was an unspoken rule. If one of us was in real trouble, the other showed up. So when Marco called me last spring and said, "Aina, it's my kidneys, they're failing," I didn't think twice. He told me he'd been feeling off for months, tired, nauseous, swelling in his ankles, but he'd chalked it up to stress and bad takeout. Finally, after nearly passing out at work, he went to the ER. The labs were bad. The follow-up was worse. End-stage renal disease. His kidneys were barely functioning at 10%. Dialysis kept him alive, but barely. 3 times a week, 4 hours each session, hooked up to a machine in a beige room that smelled faintly like cleaning fluid and wet cardboard. He said it left him wrung out, like someone had drained all the color from him. I saw it myself the first time I visited. Marco, wrapped in a thin blanket, eyes shadowed, that restless energy I'd known all my life, replaced by a kind of stillness that scared me. The transplant coordinator, a woman named Laura with clipped bangs and an efficiency that felt both reassuring and terrifying, laid out the options. He could wait for a deceased donor kidney. The average wait time? 3 to 5 years. Or a living donor. I didn't need her to finish the sentence. "I'll do it," I said, my voice louder than I meant. Marco looked at me like I'd just thrown myself in front of a bus. "Anna, no, you don't have to." I said I'll do it. Mom crossed herself and muttered something about God working through family. Marco just nodded, his lips pressed together like he couldn't decide whether to thank me or argue. The process wasn't like TV. No quick, "you're a match" moment. It was weeks of blood work, 24-hour urine collections, I will spare you the details, imaging scans, and a psychological evaluation to make sure I wasn't being pressured. Dr. Patel, the surgeon, was matter of fact. "You'll be in pain for a few weeks. No heavy lifting for 6. There's a small risk of complications, blood clots, infection, hernia. But the long-term outlook is good." Mom wrung her hands. "What about her life after? What if she needs her kidney later?" Dr. Patel smiled gently. "She'll live a normal life. You only need one." That night, Marco tried to make light of it. "Guess I'll have a piece of you forever." Creepy, right? I rolled my eyes. "You've been stealing my stuff since you were 5. This is just on brand." The night before surgery, Marco texted me a blurry photo of us as kids. Me with missing front teeth, him clutching a juice box. "We're still those kids," he wrote. "Thanks for saving my life, sis." I cried in my kitchen, phone in one hand, tea growing cold in the other. Rita, my best friend since high school, came over with homemade soup and tried to distract me with gossip about her neighbors. But every so often, I'd catch her looking at me like she wanted to say something and didn't. Hospitals at 6 a.m. feel like liminal spaces. Too bright, too cold, the air heavy with anticipation. They prepped us in separate bays, but Marco kept calling out jokes to me through the curtain. "You better not give me the lazy kidney," he said. "No promises," I called back. The last thing I remember before anesthesia hit was Dr. Patel telling me they'd take care of La Reina, Marco's name for my kidney, like it was a VIP guest. When I woke up, my abdomen felt like someone had replaced my muscles with hot concrete. Every movement was a negotiation. But when they wheeled Marco in to see me, grinning and groggy, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." And for a while, it felt like enough. We had survived something huge together. We were bound by more than blood now. We were bound by shared pain, by sacrifice, by the unshakable belief that family meant showing up. If only it had stayed that simple. For the first 2 weeks after the surgery, everything felt like a Hallmark special. Mom cooked giant pots of caldo and hovered over us like we were both made of glass. Marco sent me exaggerated status updates every morning. Your kidney woke up late today but says hi, or your kidney really liked the pizza we had last night. Friends stopped by with flowers and balloons. Neighbors dropped off casseroles. It was exactly the warm, grateful aftermath I'd imagined. And then it wasn't. About 3 weeks post-op, Marco stopped answering my "how's the recovery going" texts right away. When I called, he'd pick up, but the background noise was always busy. Voices, music, traffic. "Where are you?" I asked one afternoon. "Just out," he said. "Running errands." Errands became his favorite word. Vague, flexible, untraceable. At first, I told myself it was a good sign. He was feeling strong enough to be out and about. But then I remembered how the transplant team had been very clear. Take it slow for 6 weeks. No heavy lifting. No big social events. When I brought it up, he brushed it off. "I'm fine, Anna. I'm not made of porcelain." One Saturday, I swung by his place with a container of arroz con leche. He was in the kitchen, on his laptop, papers spread across the table. When I walked in, he quickly slid a folder over the top of whatever he'd been looking at. "What's that?" I asked. "Bills," he said too quickly. "You know, fun stuff." Marco's never been the organized bills type. His idea of financial planning is hoping the Wi-Fi still works when the bill's 2 weeks late. I didn't press, but the image stuck in my head. A yellow legal pad with numbers in the margins and a logo in the corner of one sheet that looked suspiciously like a realtor's. 2 weeks later, Rita came over for coffee. She'd been doing some tax prep work for a local real estate agent she knew, and in the middle of a story about a nightmare client, she said, "Oh, and I saw your brother walking out of a realty office last Thursday. Looked sharp, too. Button down, actual shoes, not sneakers." I frowned. "You sure it was Marco?" She raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure I know what your brother looks like." I waved, but he was on the phone. It didn't make sense. He'd told me he'd been resting at home all that week. Once you start noticing, you can't stop. A phone call he takes in another room, his voice low. A new watch on his wrist. Nothing extravagant, but definitely not from a discount store. An Instagram post from a mutual friend's backyard barbecue. Marco in the corner, beer in hand, 3 weeks before he was supposed to be doing any heavy lifting or drinking alcohol. It wasn't one big red flag. It was a dozen little ones, stitched together into something I couldn't quite name. By late summer, we weren't talking every day anymore. When we did, the conversations felt thin, like he was trying to keep them short. Mom noticed, too. "He is tired," she said. "The body needs time." But I wasn't so sure. I thought about that folder on his kitchen table, the realtor logo, Rita's comment, the quick, deflecting tone he used when I asked simple questions. Somewhere in all of that, I felt it. The uneasy truth that I didn't know the full reason behind why Marco had pushed so hard for this transplant to happen so fast. And I was starting to suspect it had nothing to do with his health. It started with the property records. I wasn't looking for them at first. I was looking for reassurance, some evidence that I was being paranoid, that Marco's evasiveness had an innocent explanation. But reassurance is a slippery thing. You can search for it and still end up with exactly the thing you didn't want to find. One Thursday night, I called Rita to vent. I told her about the evasive phone calls, the new watch, the realty office sighting. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know property records are public, right? If he's buying or selling something, it's there for anyone to see." I laughed it off. Why would he be doing property stuff? He barely pays his rent on time. "Maybe," she said. "But your dad owned that empty lot over on Perez Street. You remember that, right?" I did. It was barely more than a dusty rectangle with a leaning chain-link fence, inherited from my dad's uncle decades ago. Mom always said we'd figure out what to do with it someday. Marco used to joke about turning it into a taco stand. That night, I pulled up the Bexar County Property Records site. My search history went from "How long does kidney recovery take?" to "How to search property deeds in about 3 clicks. And there it was. Seller, Morales, Marco. Buyer, West Loop Development, LLC. Sale date 5 weeks before the transplant. Amount $148,000. I stared at the screen, rereading the date. 5 weeks before, meaning he'd already closed the sale when he told me the property was still tied up in estate paperwork. $148,000. That wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to pay off his debts, buy a car, maybe even put a down payment on a house. So why hadn't he said anything? Why sell it at all without telling me or Mom? And why, in God's name, did his kidney transplant need to happen right on the heels of that sale? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how the timeline lined up. Too neatly. I didn't tell Mom. Not yet. She'd only just stopped hovering over both of us like we were recovering from the plague. I needed to hear it from Marco first. I showed up at his apartment on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced. He was sitting on the couch, game controller in hand, a half-empty soda on the coffee table. "We need to talk," I said. He muted the game. About what? The Perez Street lot. His eyes flicked toward the kitchen, toward nothing, before he said, "What about it?" "You sold it to West Loop Development for $148,000. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. He just exhaled through his nose, slow. "You've been digging through property records?" "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell Mom?" Marco leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. "Because I knew you'd react like this. Look, I had debts, Anna. Not just credit cards, real debts. I owed people who weren't going to wait around. If they thought I was about to have major surgery, they might have tried to collect in ways that weren't exactly polite." "You're saying you sold Dad's property to pay off loan sharks?" "I'm saying I did what I had to do to keep things from getting ugly." That's not the same thing as telling the truth. I wanted to believe that was the whole story, that the sale was just a desperate move to get out from under something dangerous. But when I pressed him about the timing, about why he pushed so hard for the surgery date, his answer landed like a punch to the ribs. "I couldn't risk waiting, Anna," he said. "Not just because of my health. The insurance payout from the surgery's short-term disability was the last piece I needed to square things away. If my name came up on a donor list later, I might not have been eligible for it." It took me a second to process. So, the urgency wasn't just about getting better. It was about surviving, he said, in more ways than one. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. I'd given him my kidney thinking it was purely about saving his life. And now I couldn't untangle that from the fact that I'd also helped him pull off whatever financial chess game he'd been playing in the shadows. And I had to decide whether Mom, who still thought the Perez Street lot was ours, deserved to know. The Monday after I confronted Marco, I woke up with that leaden feeling you get after a nightmare. Except I knew I hadn't dreamed any of it. The property sale. The debt. The fact that my kidney had been part of a timeline designed not just to save his health, but to cash out a safety net. I kept replaying his words. I did what I had to do to survive. The problem was, so had I. And I'd done it without lying to the people who loved me. I didn't tell Mom right away, not because I wanted to protect Marco, but because I wanted control over how this came out. If I blurted it in anger, it would turn into a screaming match. Mom would retreat into prayer mode, and Marco would twist the story until I looked like the villain. I needed something cleaner. Rita, as usual, cut through my self-doubt. "You don't have to ruin him," she said, "but you don't have to keep carrying this alone either. There's a way to make sure the truth finds daylight without you lighting yourself on fire." Her plan was simple. Plant the truth where it would naturally grow into questions. I printed the property sale record from the county website. Nothing dramatic, just the facts. Seller, buyer, date, and amount. No accusations. Then I mailed a copy to Mom. No note, no explanation. Just enough for her to see in black and white that the Perez Street lot wasn't ours anymore. If she asked Marco directly, his own answers would do the work for me. 2 weeks later, we had a small family cookout at Mom's. Marco showed up in a crisp new shirt, carrying a 6-pack of craft beer, and acting like nothing had happened. Halfway through the afternoon, Mom turned to him, in front of me, in front of our cousins, and said, "I saw the papers from the county. You sold your father's lot. When were you going to tell me?" The way his smile faltered was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. He mumbled something about timing and handling things privately, but I didn't have to say a word. The room had shifted. The cousins exchanged looks. Someone asked what he'd done with the money. He deflected. And just like that, the trust he'd relied on to keep this quiet started to dissolve. Over the next month, word trickled through the extended family, not in a scandalous, let's burn him at the stake way. More like a slow withdrawal of goodwill. fewer invites, less eagerness to help him out. At work, I kept my head down and my recovery steady. At home, I stopped taking Marco's calls unless I felt like it. He tried at first to smooth things over. We're still good, right, sis? But I didn't feed him the easy forgiveness he was looking for. Here's the part where I'm supposed to say revenge wasn't worth it, or that I found peace in letting go. No, letting it slide would have been easier in the short term, but it would have eaten at me every time I looked at my scar. I didn't go through that surgery just to be part of his con, whether he framed it as survival or not. Making sure the truth got out, without screaming, without drama, was the best thing I could have done. It didn't destroy him, but it stripped away the shield he'd been hiding behind. Now, every time he tells his version of the story, he has to do it knowing there are people in the room who know better. Marco and I still see each other at family events. We're polite. We make small talk. But the easy, unthinking trust is gone, and I'm okay with that. I don't hate him. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just done being the sister who cleans up his messes without asking what's in them. I gave him a kidney. I don't regret that. It kept him alive, and maybe someday he'll use that life for better things. But I also made sure he couldn't use me as cover for the rest of his schemes, and I'm glad I went through with it. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, share, and subscribe for more content. If you want to share your stories, please comment below. Additionally, what is your opinion on the poster's decision?